Good morning, everyone. You are very welcome to today's Enterprise Ireland webinar, The Future of the UK Ports Industry, Overview, Trends and Opportunities. This is a webinar which intends to inform the Irish supply chain about the latest developments in the UK ports industry, from development plans in ports for offshore wind and Freeports to emerging trends in port decarbonisation and smart ports. For those unfamiliar with Enterprise Ireland and the work that we do, we are the government organisation responsible for the development and growth of Irish enterprises in global markets. We have offices in over 40 countries around the world, including 2 in the UK, in London and in Manchester. We work across a number of sectors, including ports and maritime, which we have identified as an emerging export opportunity for Irish SMEs. To give you a quick run through of the agenda for today, I'm delighted to welcome our panel of industry experts who have agreed to present today. Firstly, we have Andy Ray, who is the Group Head of Commercial Offshore Wind at Associated British Ports. Andy will be speaking about ABP's plans at their major offshore wind ports, such as in Lowestoft and in Hull. Following Andy, we will hear from Emma Cowper, who is the Sustainability Manager at DP World London Gateway, who will give us an overview of DP World's decarbonisation strategy and also an insight into their new Freeport status. And finally, we have Tom White, who is the Innovation Architect and Ports and Maritime Lead at the Connected Places Catapult. The Catapult have published extensive amounts of material on port digitalisation, smart ports, and decarbonisation of ports. And Tom will give us an insight into some of the work that they have been doing. Then at the very end, we will also be launching our new market intelligence report on the UK ports industry. This report is aimed at Irish SMEs who wish to gain a greater insight into the UK ports industry and covers all of the areas that we are hoping to cover in today's session. So offshore wind, free ports, decarbonisation, digitalisation, and more. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to submit them to the speakers via the questions or the chat tabs. You will find those on the sidebar to the right of your screen. If we do not get to all of the questions, we'll be sure to pass them on to the speakers after the webinar, and we will follow up at the end of the session. So without further ado, I would like to invite Andy to begin his presentation. Andy, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, I'm just going to run through a few slides over the next 10 minutes and then a brief video at the end, just to introduce ABP and our experience in offshore wind over the past kind of 15 years. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background regarding ABP, Associated British Ports. We are a network of 21 ports across the UK. Our ports support major sectors, including the energy, cruise, containers, agri-bulks, automotive, and a whole host of others. We are owned by a group of sovereign wealth funds and pension companies who provide us with the kind of financial firepower to be able to invest in the long term in our assets in the UK. Collectively, across all 21 ports, we handle around 88 million tonnes of cargo per annum, and we generate broadly £7.5 billion for the UK economy, and we support around 119,000 jobs across the UK. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide just summarizes our interaction specifically with the offshore wind industry. Across the 21 ports, there are actually probably only 3 or 4 which are directly involved in the offshore wind industry on a regular basis. The flagship across those ports is the Port of Hull, where we host Siemens blade manufacturing facility. This is where they produce their offshore wind turbine blades. We also host a pre-assembly and load-out port within the Greenport Hull on the Humber. In addition to that, across 3 of our other ports, we also host a significant proportion, in excess of 50%, of the UK's O&M facilities supporting the offshore wind industry. That currently stands at around, these O&M facilities supporting around 7 gigawatts of installed offshore wind capacity. The largest of those being Grimsby. It's not only the largest in the UK, but it's also currently the world's largest O&M facility in terms of gigawatts supported from that port. We also host the ORE Catapults Research Centre. Centre of Excellence for O&M is also located in Grimsby. Moving across to the northwest coast of England, we have the Port of Barrow, which is home to a cluster of O&M facilities supporting various offshore wind farms in the Irish Sea, and ideally located to support the recently announced winners of the Crown Estate leasing process, with 3 projects being secured in the Irish Sea in close proximity to Barrow. And then finally, in terms of O&M, we have the Port of Lowestoft, which is the base for SSE's Greater Gabbard O&M facility, and Scottish Power's recently completed East Anglia 1 O&M facility, and again, well positioned to support the southern North Sea and all of the development projects which we're likely to see off that coastline over the coming decade. And then finally, down on the south coast, we have a sister organisation, ABP MER, who provide marine consultancy and environmental planning services, not only to offshore wind clients, but to a whole host of marine users. But they have a particular expertise in terms of offshore wind and supporting the development phase of offshore wind projects. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to zoom in on the Greenport Hull facility, the Humber over the past 5 years has become the #1 offshore wind cluster in the UK, predominantly due to this significant investment in Greenport Hull, which is broadly £310 million worth of investment from both ABP, Siemens, along with support from the UK government, to develop a 54-hectare site with 3 load-out berths. You can see there at the top of that image, as well as the Siemens blade manufacturing facility. And you can see in that image some of the output of that factory with the blades lined up there. This facility has to date exported roughly 2 gigawatts of turbine components into the UK market. And this year alone, we're expecting to export nearly another 2 gigawatts in this year, and there's a pipeline of projects out into the future. This facility not only supports that construction phase of UK projects, but the blades produced within the Siemens factory are also exported across Europe to various other projects and pre-assembly ports. The success of this investment, this £310 million, it hasn't just been in the physical infrastructure. There's also been a wider program of business engagement across the region. So there's been a significant program of supply chain engagement as part of this investment, and that has been led by not only ABP and Siemens, but also the various local authorities and local bodies in the area, providing business support to supply chain organizations who are interested in engaging with the offshore industry. And that's been hugely successful over the past 5 years. And it's engaged with, I think, nearly 200 companies within the local kind of ecosystem, as well as with universities, providing business grants, working with the universities and local colleges to develop the skills required to support this type of production facility, as well as the O&M facilities located on the Humber. One of the main reasons that it has been so successful in Hull has been its proximity to market. And what you can see from the image in the bottom right-hand corner is that Grimsby and the Humber estuary is perfectly located to support everything from as far north as the Dogger Bank zone, all the way down to the southern North Sea projects just off the coast of Lowestoft. Next slide, please. So following on from that, what what we would argue is a hugely successful investment. We've started to develop our plans for the next phase of development for Hull and the Greenport Hull facility. And this is a visualization of one of our development scenarios for the port. It includes the investment of additional capital to produce an additional 3 heavy lift quays, up to 94 acres of land adjacent to the quay, effectively doubling the workable area of the existing Greenport Hull facility. The idea here is that we create a landing zone for other tier 1 suppliers in parallel to Siemens, or potentially tier 2, tier 3 suppliers who can then support Siemens with products and services, but also having a kind of a multi-user arrangement with the key infrastructure, as the current Greenport Hull facility is fairly dominated by Siemens. There's an exclusivity element to that, and we envisage that in the future there will be a market for other either turbine manufacturers or other elements of the supply chain to come to Hull and utilize this additional facility. So we're looking to build on the back of a successful Greenport Hull investment and move on to phase 2 as shown here. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So as well as that manufacturing element and the success of Greenport Hull, as I mentioned, we've also got a significant proportion of the UK's O&M, offshore wind O&M capacity, predominantly centered around Grimsby, Barrow and Lowestoft, but we're also starting to look at the potential of the Celtic Sea, just off the south coast of Wales there. And again, the success of these ports is entirely related to not only the physical infrastructure being able to support the number of vessel movements required and available land, but also proximity to the market. These ports are in close proximity to the large centres of offshore wind development we've seen to date, and we're likely to see over the next decade or two. Moving to the next slide. I'd just like to take an opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into one of our development projects we have centred around Lowestoft. We are currently working on this development, which we're calling LEAF, the Lowestoft Eastern Energy Facility. Lowestoft is currently an offshore wind O&M hub supporting, as I mentioned earlier on, the SSE Greater Gabbard and Scottish Power's East Anglia 1 project. But we recognise that in order for the UK to reach its 40 gigawatts by 2030 ambition, there's going to be multi-gigawatts of offshore wind to be installed off the coast of the east of England there. And we are developing this project in order to satisfy that demand we see coming down the line. So what we propose here is the redevelopment of the outer harbour within Lowestoft to develop this facility, to provide dedicated O&M facilities as well as a construction support base to support up to 10 gigawatts of offshore wind installed capacity. What this infrastructure will be able to do will be able to receive the larger SOV type vessels as well as existing CTVs, provide land for operational activities as well as storage requirements, including cable storage. And we anticipate that this type of asset is able to support between 500 and 1,000 technical O&M and construction jobs over the next 30 years of operation. But this type of asset doesn't work in isolation. And what we've learned from the Greenport Hull process is that bringing in the other local partners, the local councils, the local enterprise partnerships along the journey just results in development which is equal to more than the sum of its individual parts. So what we're planning for the Lowestoft Eastern Energy Facility is to work with East Suffolk Council and to develop an area to the north of the port whereby tier 2, tier 3 supply chain organisations can find a soft landing zone to work in close proximity with the port activities and these developers to create a cluster effect for Lowestoft and for it to become the #1 port in terms of O&M support for the east of England. And I think I'm burning through my time quite quickly. So I'd just like to flick to the next slide, which is a brief video showing our development plans for the Port of Lowestoft. So I'm not sure the inspirational music is coming through on everyone else's, but I'll probably do a talk over. This video was created to kind of illustrate the vision that ABP has for the Port of Lowestoft over the next 30 years. So what we're showing here is the current offshore wind users of the port, but it's not just about the current users in terms of the developers. There are a whole host of supply chain organizations clustered in and around the port supporting those offshore wind farms. Yeah, and this part of the video just shows some of the other marine-based organizations also in the vicinity of the port. Our plans in terms of the redevelopment involve a capital dredge to allow larger vessels to access the outer harbour there. 360 metres of quay capable of supporting these larger SOV type vessels, which require deeper dredge pockets alongside the quay. Up to 6 acres of flexible storage and marshalling area on the peninsula there. This is an interesting point. We are already in discussions with various organisations around the provision of alternative fuels, whether that be pure hydrogen or hydrogen-based alternative fuels such as green ammonia. We are in discussions with various organisations on how best to bring that into the port environment to offer to our customers the opportunity to decarbonise their activities in the future. So as well as the on-port developments, we are also working with the Suffolk Council around the improvement of the amenity and the buildings in the vicinity of the port, and that power park area is envisaged to become the soft landing zone for the supply chain in support of the 10 gigawatts of offshore wind we're likely to see in the future. And that's an image of as it is currently, and that's our visualization of what the asset could be in the future. So that was just to give you a flavor of the type of development activity we are undertaking at the moment to support the offshore wind industry. And that's the end of my input.
Thank you very much, Andy, for that very insightful presentation. For anyone who felt that they missed out by not hearing the music, we will be sending around the slides after the session, so you'll be able to watch through that again. Just a couple of questions for you, Andy, just based off that presentation that you gave. So obviously there's quite a lot of significant developments that you mentioned, both in Hull and in Lowestoft. I suppose that the first question that would jump to mind is that these are obviously big capital investments that are going to last, you know, for the coming decades. Has there been much consideration about the climate impacts and how that might impact on the infrastructure? Have you needed to kind of take that into consideration when investing into these long-term projects?
You mean in terms of sea level increases and such?
Yeah, weather impacts, that's the likes.
Yeah, that's all part of the design process. So we've taken flood risk assessments of these assets. Some of the development we're proposing requires us to provide environmental offsetting. So, you know, for example, the development of Greenport Hull, there is a requirement, because it's an intertidal area, to provide offset habitat elsewhere on the estuary to kind of allow the wading birds and things to kind of have a home to live. So yeah, these are all part of the environmental impact assessments, and yeah, flood risk assessment is part of that. And we're looking out over, well, it's probably over 100 years. We're looking out for the as part of that flood risk assessment process.
Brilliant. And then I suppose in terms of other trends and changes that are coming down the pipeline, obviously floating offshore wind is something that's being talked about a lot, and we're seeing proposals for projects happening quite soon. Is that something that is going to pose different challenges in port in terms of the material handling side of things and the infrastructure side of things? How is that going to change how the port operates?
That's not such an issue for the existing assets, because the east coast of the UK is pretty much dominated by fixed bottom. But when you look to more the Irish coastline, the Celtic Sea off the south coast of Wales, that's perfect for floating offshore wind. These structures, from a port perspective, they need deep water. They need significant heavy lift key capability to install these future kind of 20 megawatt sized turbines. We have a development project underway looking into that for Port Talbot, which is one of our South Wales ports. Not something I brought up today, but it's high on our agenda to be looking to provide infrastructure to support the deployment of offshore wind in the future. One of the big challenges there is we haven't centered in on a particular technology type. So the specification for the infrastructure, it's as yet undefined. So we're effectively having to design things and plan to build things which are suitable for a wide range of technologies, which is challenging and potentially is more cost. So what it would be useful to do would be for the industry, the developers, to kind of narrow down their technology selection into maybe 2 or 3 technology types over the coming decade.
That's great. Just a final question that I wanted to get to before we move on. There are a few questions that I might have to follow up on, but something that you brought up there was in terms of collaboration with the supply chain and the importance of that to ABP and the surrounding stakeholders. We know it would be remiss of me not to mention Vern Luby, who worked on the Lowestoft Eastern Energy Facility. In terms of collaboration with the supply chain, what are the key aspects that ABP are looking for? You brought up proximity as a key metric for engaging with supply chain. Are there other elements like innovation or cost that are important to ABP when engaging with the supply chain?
Yeah, there are 2 elements here. There's our supply chain, ABP's procurement process, and then there's the offshore wind supply chain, which we're encouraging to co-locate with us. But in terms of our own procurement process, yes, innovation. We have a formalized tender process whereby sustainability, environmental impact. We give our potential suppliers the opportunity to demonstrate how they can innovate. And that's all part of our selection process. And Vern Luby clearly did a good job in securing the contract for the LEAF project.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Andy, for your presentation. I will definitely follow up with whatever questions that are coming through. We'll now move on to our second speaker, Emma Cowper from DP World London Gateway is going to speak about sustainability and the plans in London Gateway for that. Emma, I'll hand over to you.
Great, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all well and not too hot. Jack, can you keep an eye on the time, please? Because I'll might have to skip through some of the presentation.
No problem.
Thank you. So, DP World. I'm going to talk to you today, could I have the next slide please, about DP World and London Gateway very briefly. I'll give you a quick overview of our sustainability programme, go into depth as much as I can in this short period of time about decarbonisation, and then if we've got some time left, I'll talk to you about our new exciting Thames Freeport. Next slide, please. Great. So DP World is a global company. Head office is in Dubai. They have grown very quickly to 36,000 people, about 80 marine and inland terminals across the world. And in the last 10 years or so, they've invested about £2 billion into the UK. That's via London Gateway, so the new deep sea container port on the Thames estuary, and Southampton container port, as well as P&O ferries and some other maritime assets from around the UK supply chain. Next slide, please. So DP World London Gateway, the port is a multimodal, semi-automated deep sea container port built. We went live in 2015, I think it was. Yeah, 2015. We're now the third largest container terminal in the UK, and we currently employ over 700 people. And we also have London Gateway Logistics Park, so that's immediately adjacent to the port. You can kind of see in the bottom photo the warehouses there, and then in the background you can see the port, so that's the River Thames. There's 9.25 million square feet of land available for development, so we currently have about 30% built out, so that's a continual rolling program which is increasing year on year. We have UPS, Dixon's, Carphone, Made.com, and a few other chilled and frozen food operators. There are about 1,200 people working on the park at the moment, but when it's fully built, we expect there to be about 45,000 people through direct and indirect jobs. Next slide, please. So sustainability, this is a global approach dictated by, well, dictated is a strong word, but guided by head office. So it's a global approach with a local focus. So you can see from this diagram on the right that sustainability is a key part of how we run our business. So that's just showing how integral it is to everything else that we do, as well as adding value. And the aim or the purpose of the business as a group is to lead the future of world trade, and sustainability forms part of that. Next slide, please. So our approach to sustainability is to enable smarter trade to create a better future for everybody, and this is guided by the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and our strategy is called Our World, Our Future. And next slide, please. So this is Our World, Our Future. So it's split into two segments. The top part, Our World, is about 7 responsible business priority, and that's looking internally at how we operate and how we can be the best that we can be as a business. And then the second part is Our Future. So this is looking at 3 legacy areas where we want to make a difference for our community. So we recognise that we want to be here for the long term as a business, and how we can make a positive difference for our local community, so through education, women and oceans. Next page, please. So decarbonisation. As a group, we have literally this month, a couple of weeks ago, released carbon neutrality statement. So they want to achieve that by 2050. With an intermediary target of 28% reduction of our carbon footprint by 2030. And that's including new businesses. Obviously, I mentioned briefly at the beginning, DP World as a group is a rapidly growing company. So they'll be working with each new company as they come on board. And at London Gateway, we'll then be translating that down to us at a local level. Next slide, please. So to achieve this, there's obviously quite a lot needs to be done. Maritime and shipping and ports, as you probably all are aware, are traditionally very dirty, diesel-orientated places to work. So we have 3 guiding principles to try and meet our targets. So the first one is to displace fossil fuels. Second one is to procure renewable energy. And the third one is to maximise efficiency. And as you can see from the graph on the right-hand side, the most amount of impact can be done by displacing fossil fuels, but quite a lot can still be done over time for the other 2. Next slide, please. So this, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but another way of achieving this is to look at the different streams of the business. So equipment, electrification and efficiency. So we've set ambitions and how we're going to achieve it. Process efficiency and digitalisation, renewable energy supply, low carbon fuel supply and carbon compensation. We recognise that in some places, until technology is caught up, we will need to compensate through carbon offsetting or blue marine credits or carbon credits as an interim stopgap. But we need to make sure that they're accredited and they're actually verified and they're actually doing what they say on the tin. And next slide, please. So DP World London Gateway, we will be targeting carbon reduction across both the ports and logistics park. We have a 10-year plan to reduce our emissions, which goes into detail of all aspects of our equipment, electrification and efficiency. There's a lot to be gained from just making our processes more efficient. We have just introduced, or have announced the introduction, which will come into play on the 1st of October, an energy transition contribution, which will go on all import containers. And that will help us achieve these carbon reductions in the supply chain. So it will create a fund which will help fund new equipment, which will be electric, because a lot of equipment is at least 35% more expensive. So we'll be investing, I think it's over 100 million into this space, but this will help feed into that. We also have an energy and carbon working group, and we get all our data verified by an external group. So we have 2 certifications, one which is at group level, Lloyd's Register, and one which is a UK level Planet Mark certification. And next slide, please. So a couple of examples. We have 11 hybrid shuttle carriers. They reduce our diesel consumption by 30%, and we're trialling an electric shuttle carrier with Kalmar, and that can be charged in 5 minutes and it has a runtime of 55 minutes. So obviously there's quite a few logistical issues around making sure that it's actually available for operations, but it does have 0 on-site emissions. Obviously there's no risk of fuel leaks, especially when you're operating right next to the river. They also reduce the filter and lubricant waste, maintenance costs and energy costs per move over hybrid. So they're actually significantly better for the business and the environment in lots of different ways. Next slide, please.
I might just say, if you could, 2 minutes, Emma, potentially, we might just move on to the question.
We've got logistics park reduction scheme. I'll skip past that. So that's basically construction carbon, embodied carbon, trying to reduce the amount of carbon in construction. Next slide, please. I'll skip past that one. Okay, so Thames Freeport, next slide. So this is in conjunction with Ford Dagenham and Tilbury Port just down the road. And could you go to the next slide, please? So the idea of this is that we're working together with the councils and with the businesses to create a huge change in the local area. There's quite a big issue of deprivation and lack of skills and housing. So we really hope that the Freeport will help improve that. There's going to be an economic impact, huge amount of land which will get planning consent. There's a huge skills program planned through the skills accelerator, There'll be a lot of funding put into that. And there's also an innovation hub. I'll skip down to that, which is the two key things from it for the community are a skills accelerator, innovation hub, where there'll be a Freeport board which will lead the focus and where the money is put into on those two aspects. Next slide, please. So that's, I covered the skills accelerator and innovation hub. Next slide, please. And then it's also a huge focus on transitioning to net zero. So we're reducing the carbon footprint of international trade, reducing the carbon footprint of domestic trade, and easing congestion on the local major A road, supporting UK adoption of electric vehicles. Ford are also trialling an autonomous net zero vehicle, attracting investment in clean energy and circular economy, supporting innovation in low carbon energy and transport, and prioritising and investing in a hydrogen pilot. Next slide, please. That's it. Sorry to rush through the end. Any questions?
That's great. Thank you so much, Emma. You covered a lot of ground there in a short amount of time, so well done. Just a couple of questions before we move on. Come back to the Freeports for sure, because that is definitely a key topic for the Irish supply chain. No but firstly, just on the decarbonisation side of things. In terms of in London Gateway, as a specific city port, I suppose there are unique challenges there in terms of freight traveling through densely populated areas, and then also, I suppose, with the Freeports, with increased manufacturing, I presume there's unique challenges there. How is that being mitigated by DP World? What are your plans there? What sort of challenges have you faced?
In terms of manufacturing?
Yeah, and also in terms of increased emissions at port.
So manufacturing, DP World doesn't really have much of that on site, and it doesn't really plan to. Customers might assemble things on site, but they won't be manufacturing as such. In terms of increased development and traffic, with going to net zero, then it kind of all goes along hand in hand. So obviously there's increased quality standards on vehicles, and the government's obviously just announced that. So as government bringing legislation, actually that helps us, and it helps everyone move in the right direction. And we are working with BRC, British Retail Consortium. We've just released a report. If you have a look at their website, and I can send through the link, on a net zero vehicles in logistics report, and actually how to we're basically lobbying government to say they need to take these steps to help us achieve that. And there's also an article on there, and we've released around that. So there's lots to be done, but as a hub, obviously there's only so much we can do. The hauliers are our customers, so we have looked at putting a charge on to hauliers, but actually the amount of vehicles that would actually get money back from that as such, there's not many vehicles. They're all to the right standards. So it'd be more working with them to help the R&D side and innovation through the Freeport with Ford to try and accelerate technology.
Great. And then in terms of the supply chain, so when partnering with companies and SMEs, does sustainability and decarbonisation factor into that decision making? Is the supply chain something that's also being considered as part of the decarbonisation and sustainability strategy?
Yes, so procurement is obviously a really key part, and it is one of the areas that is weighted and assessed. So when a tender goes out, we ask companies to submit what they're doing around it, and then we assess it on an individual basis. But yeah, it is an important topic.
Great. And then I suppose quickly on Freeport side of things, that's obviously an area of interest for Ireland. Ireland actually, for those of you who don't know, had the first ever Freeport, the Shannon Enterprise Zone. But in terms of, I suppose, the sustainability side of things, Thames Freeport is including a proposal for a low carbon highway. Could you tell us a little bit about that and the plans there?
I am not actually entirely sure what that bit is yet. I'm still waiting to be told. I think that is around the Ford trial for the net zero autonomous vehicle. So I think there's discussions about how we can use London Gateway Logistics Park as a trial location for autonomous vehicles, and then obviously they can scale it out from there. That I don't know any more than that, I'm afraid.
I suppose a lot of these strategies and implementations are going to be revealed as we go through the Freeport strategy, and it's quite a process, I suppose. Do you have quickly in terms of a time frame for when there will be announcements, or where does the Freeport kind of time frame sit for DP World?
I think we expect a final decision to be made in September, October time. And then, so at the moment, I think they're submitting the final documents, and then hopefully we get final approval September, October, but who knows with what else is going on if that'll get delayed.
Of course. Thanks very much, Emma. I appreciate you covering off several very important topics in a short amount of time.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. We'll now move on to our final speaker. Tom White is the Innovation and Ports and Maritime Lead at Connected Places Catapult. Tom, the floor is yours.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Jack. And I will try and proceed at a bit of a pace, but I think we'll be sharing all the slides from this afterwards. So please do have a look afterwards as well. Yeah, afternoon, everybody. I'm Tom White, Maritime Ports Lead at the Connected Places Catapult. Could we jump to the next slide, please? I'll just go through these quickly. If you're not aware of the Catapult network, we're part funded by Innovate UK in the UK. Really, there are lots of different flavors of catapults around the UK, whether that's in medicines discovery, satellite applications. You hear from Andy about the offshore renewables catapult, for example. Next slide, please. But really what we're here to do is about market making. So increasing the supply of innovative products and services to market, working with SMEs to help strengthen their product offer, but as well boosting the demand from more informed, more connected and intelligent customers. Really all about market making and disruption. Go to the next slide. I won't speak to everything in this one, but just to give you just to keep clicking through, please. Just to give you a feel for the sort of support the Catapult can do, everything on here is something that we do to actually deliver on that mission of helping support SMEs deliver a quality product target at the right market, but as well helping buyers to be able to access that, whether that's challenges in procurement, whether that's challenges around having the confidence to actually invest in a new technology to solve a challenge, or even fundamentally understanding what that challenge is. So if we jump to the next slide, please. So specifically what we're here to talk about today, future ports. So we're the Connected Places Catapult. We really focus on place and transport. So why are we interested in ports? Well, after establishing ports and maritime as a key focus area about 18 months ago, our view is really that ports of the future, or rather the future of what ports should do, goes well beyond just facilitating the movement of cargo. That really they are vital multimodal intersections for people, goods and ideas, with a huge potential to drive wider impact in digitalisation and decarbonisation for regions, national economies and communities. And we've already seen some really great examples of this, both from Emma and Andy. In terms of the impacts that port can have on local employment, on the manufacturing, on energy systems and the national economy. So next slide, please. So what does the future port maybe look like? And we can be talking about things like how we use ports to stimulate use of our inland and coastal waterways better, probably grossly underutilized in the UK. As well, there are opportunities around autonomous and remotely controlled vessels in and around ports. We can be talking about things like autonomous or remote cargo handling operations. As well, we've heard quite a lot on energy transition today, and the unique position ports are in to be able to access potentially multiple renewable energy vectors, whether that's in solar, wind, geothermal, tidal, and actually how they move from being the multimodal transport hubs of today to actually the multimodal energy hubs of the future, which I'll talk on in a moment. As well, it's their role in wider supply chains and connected logistics. And we all know that logistics and supply chain challenges are huge challenges to solve, involving many stakeholders. But actually what you have in a port is actually the intersection where you get road, rail, air and sea all coming together in one place to be able to develop out those whole systems concepts that you can then scale and apply outward to other areas. And as well, brought into sharp focus over the last year or so is our digital borders and customs processes to provide a most frictionless borders as possible. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So over the last year, we've done a fair bit of work on this, whether that's in maritime autonomy. We're a founding partner at the Innovation Hub 2050 at the Port of Tyne. We've delivered the DFT's Port of the Future roadmap, worked with ports around the UK on future port use cases, as well as supporting several of the Freeport bids in England, and recently having launched our Freeport playbook that tries to really get back to that core mission of Freeports. What they should be doing this time around is supporting that wider regional impact and functioning really as cross-sector innovation hubs for those regions. As well, some work on ports as energy hubs, and a recent project we completed in terms of the port's impact on its wider community in geospatial optimization and optimizing the flow of traffic in and out of the port based on things like customs pre-clearance and how we make best use of off-site assets such as logistics consolidation centers. So next slide, please. I'll just canter through these at a pace, but in your own time to have a review of some of the work we've done. So we've looked at various business models and enabling factors to make greater use of our inland waterways, either through the use of autonomous clean technology, looking at aspects such as infrastructure access, local policy support and navigational considerations to identify where are the key areas in the UK where we can actually deploy things like water taxis or deploy last mile by water, for example, in freight into urban centres. So next slide, please. As well, as I mentioned, we delivered the DFT's Ports of the Future vision, and really what this is meant as is a whole value chain. So retailer to dockside to insurance company, taking that whole view of where those where those interfaces are between those different stakeholders and identifying what causes us pain today from a broader systems concept to be able to actually define with the ports being, as I mentioned, the intersection where all these things come together, what the port of the future should actually be doing. So if we go to the next slide, please. And fundamentally, what that really means, and again, I think what we've heard today just really tries to drive this home, is that ports fundamentally are efficient enablers for sustainable economic growth in the UK, and they achieve that by being connected in both a physical and digital sense, digital, green, and working as economic activity hubs. And in our report, which I'm sure we'll share the link to afterwards, there's a whole series of recommendations and a whole lot of detail behind this about how we actually unlock that potential. So next slide, please. And really, when you start to break all that down, we're really talking about supply chain 4.0 principles, which are to be efficient, connected, clean, resilient, transparent, safe, ethical, and secure. So next slide. And just an example of somewhere else we're applying this is actually up in Sunderland, where as part of the DCMS 5G project, we're working on connected autonomous logistics of moving a 40-ton autonomous transfer vehicle within the actual Nissan manufacturing site to move materials around as part of the manufacturing process to reduce cost, increase efficiency, and improve safety. And really what this starts to do is starts to build out the concept of actually how you take this idea of doing this within a defined area and start developing connected autonomous logistics corridors. So next slide, please. And one thing to mention as well is after our DFT Ports of the Future study, which delivered that high-level blueprint roadmap of where we should be going, obviously a key part of that is how we actually action it and how we actually execute on that plan. So what we did straight after that was went to 5 ports around the UK. So from this vision, what is the thing you would do tomorrow? So we worked with the likes of PLA, Port of Tyne, Shore, Milford Haven and Portsmouth, where we actually generated really clear use cases, such as virtual pre-gate clearance for traffic into and out of Portsmouth, predictive maintenance for assets both at sea and at the port, as well looking into predictive environmental modelling to actually predict the impacts of climate change on the River Thames and how that fundamentally impacts how we use the river in the future, as well looking at shore power and renewable microgrids, where our future energy customers at ports might not just be on the water. So next slide, please. And I think quickly, just the last couple of slides. So this is something released not too long ago around the concept of ports as energy hubs. And like I've mentioned, really to get to this point, building on things like the growing offshore wind sector, where we have all these new clean energy vectors from which we can potentially generate hydrogen or hydrogen derivatives or provide electricity to actually transition ports from the multimodal transport hubs of today to the multimodal energy hubs of the future, where some connecting work we've done on the zero emission transfers for heavy goods vehicles, for example, that we did last year, fed directly into the 10-point plan announced by the Prime Minister this year, which included, I think, around £20 million in funding for hydrogen HGV trial projects. Next slide, please. And of course, you can't talk about ports without Freeports. So yes, we supported several of the Freeport bids in the UK, really from the perspective that of the potential they have for positive impact on regions, really driven by attracting foreign direct investment, which really has to be done by targeting a specialism or a niche for an area, whether that's in cybersecurity, clean technology, and driving international collaboration. This is how we're going to reduce the risk of just moving jobs from one place to another within a country and actually stimulate jobs and economic growth. And as well, their potential to deliver wider systemic impacts, as we've already heard about bringing the supply chain with us. It's about more than what's just going on in the port. It's about that whole value chain. And the regulatory flexibility we're going to have through Freeports will allow us to trial new technologies and hopefully stimulate the market. And of course, at the heart of all the Freeports is transition to net zero and how we actually take the supply chain with us along that journey. So next slide, please.
I might get you to wrap up shortly, if that's all right, Tom.
Yeah, should be the last one, I think. So yeah, we've released our Freeport playbook to support. It's really trying to get back to our basics of what are Freeport objectives, benefits and global positioning, operational models and things like that. And I suppose just to mention finally, obviously Freeport's initiatives going on in England are really vital at the moment. Of course, around the corner we have Scotland, Wales, Ireland, where the latest we're hearing from the Scottish government is theirs are going to be specifically green ports to stimulate investment in multimodal green technologies. So really big opportunity around the corner there. And just to check, Jack, I think that might have been my last slide. It was, yeah, very good. And yeah, thank you very much.
That's brilliant, Tom. Thanks so much. And once again for covering such a broad range of topics. Really, we could do a session on each of them, and we do intend to do a session on each of them, and we will have to get you back if you're available to talk in more detail. Just quickly, I have one so it's an outstanding question to ask you. Obviously, with the digitalisation piece, there's so much that can be done, and there are so many major plans that are being implemented by ports. I'm just wondering, where do you reckon we are in terms of the timeline now, and how far do we have to go in order to achieve that kind of smart port sort of realization?
Well, I think part of the challenge is everybody's definition of what makes a port smart is slightly different and will depend on their own context. And for some, that will be focusing on how we manage energy. For others, that, for example, are a key part of regional manufacturing chains, and I'm minded of areas like the Northeast, for example, then it might be around connected logistics. I think there are some fundamental challenges we have in terms of connectivity, that ports aren't always the most digitally connected, either for assets on the road or at sea, and that I'm counting hinterland connectivity in that as well. It's because obviously, if we're considering something like tracking the movement of goods through a rural area, we don't always have good data connectivity with the vehicles on the road. So I would say it depends really, and it depends on the scale at which you're operating in the UK. I mean, when we think about ports in the UK, obviously we have some very large ports here, but there are over 170 ports in the UK of all different shapes and sizes and different operating models, from local authority ports to trust ports to commercial ports with access to international technology. So I think part of the challenge is actually coordinating all that effort, and it's quite difficult to put a timeline on it and say where are we, because I don't think there is a collective position where we all are. We're all at different positions.
Of course, yeah, and there's certainly much to be done in the space, and it's a very exciting area. Unfortunately, we'll have to wrap it up there, but thank you very much, Tom. And the last thing that I will say is that I would encourage everyone on the webinar to check out some of the Connected Places Catapults reports that Tom points to, especially the use cases. They are very interesting reading, and I will point you to them, and you'll be able to see them when I circulate the slides after the session. So thank you very much, Tom, and thank you as well to Andy and Emma for their very insightful contributions. Just to finish up quickly, as I mentioned at the start of this session, we've published some new market intelligence ourselves in the form of a report on the UK ports industry, aimed at Irish SMEs who are looking to learn more about the industry. The report covers all of the topics that we did today in this session, as well as providing an overview of all of the major port authorities, such as ABP. That first section is a general overview, covers the key stakeholders in the industry, some data about the size of the market, and commentary on the key trends and challenges in the industry, such as Brexit and its effect on the sector. Subsequent sections then, we cover offshore wind, we cover net zero and decarbonisation, an overview of the new UK government strategies there and the targets, and some of the sector needs and potential areas of innovation. Then the subsequent sections, we have Freeports, which gives some background as to the policy measures and the plans around that, including Thames Freeport as well as the other Freeports. And then the final section, we cover that piece that we mentioned there around port technology, potential use cases, and there's a vast array of data available there. This report is available as a handout, which is attached to this webinar. You'll find it under the handouts section, and it'll also be circulated following this webinar. So that just about wraps it up from us. A big thank you once again to our three speakers, Andy, Emma, and Tom, for giving up their time and for providing the insights into their company's very exciting plans. Thank you as well to everyone who attended. I hope you found this session insightful. I will be circulating an email with slides as well as the report and a feedback survey after the webinar. Finally, if you would like to get in touch with us, we are more than happy to chat about how Enterprise Ireland can support your company in this area. So please feel free to contact either myself or my colleague, Dara Cotter, who has been of help with this webinar. That's all from us, really. Thanks again for joining the session. Hope you enjoyed the rest of your day and hope to see you soon. Thank you.